on Loudoun County. It's just a small snapshot, but that view of transmission lines of big data center boxes with air handlers on top of the roof and with cranes in the background building yet more data centers. That's a very real experience for folks in Loudoun County right now. We're going to cover some current trends in energy systems, local data center proposals, and some recommendations for best practices at the local level. Next slide. This is the big picture. This is a map from the National Research Energy Labs, which has been renamed recently, but it's a pretty interesting map. It shows the infrastructure that's related to data centers, and it's a combination of the fiber optic network, the transmission grid, and then the hotspots of activity. So, where there's activity is reasonably predictable. It's where there's a combination of fiber optic cable, transmission lines, and then the other factors are availability of power, beyond the transmission capacity, water, and then to a lesser extent, the receptiveness of the community. There's still some hunting around for incentives, tax incentives, development incentives, but by far the biggest factor is availability of energy. And you've seen the headlines, I would imagine. Next slide. When we say we're the global epicenter, that's not our data. That's Cushman and Wakefield's data from data center leasing around the world. So we're not exaggerating how important the Mid-Atlantic region is. Virginia as a whole is up over 6 gigawatts worth of data centers online. And that shows you it's relative to China, to Oregon, to other parts of the country. And, that's putting a huge amount of pressure directly on Loudoun County, Prince William County, I think Frederick County, Maryland. But it's also putting direct pressure on all of us in the surrounding areas for the energy infrastructure and increasingly for the water infrastructure that's necessary to, power and supply water for this complex of buildings. Next slide. Here's a map. The link on the slide, and when you distribute these slides, that link will be live. That'll take you to our data center map. What we found early on in our work 5 years ago was that, no one was really keeping track of all the applications. No one at the state level, no one nationally. There were some maps of what leasing was available, but not of where applications were being proposed. So we did a crowdsourced map that we then had our professional planning staff go and validate. And so the dots on this map tie to specific parcels of land and have as much information as we've been able to collect. So that's an ongoing resource. It's only in Virginia, but I think the mechanics is relatively simple. It might be something that the state of Pennsylvania could develop. Next slide. What we found when we added it all up was that there are about 60 million square feet being constructed, already in existence, and there's another 350 million square feet in the pipeline of approval. It's hard to get perspective on that. Those aren't numbers any of us are used to looking at. But when I went and looked for data on how much sort of developed retail, commercial, and industrial space there was in Northern Virginia, I came up with about 150 million. So doubling of the footprint of Northern Virginia. For those of us who are in conservation, water quality, water supply, that's a lot of impervious surface just from the footprint of the buildings. And, one of the concerns regionally is that this hasn't fully been incorporated into the Chesapeake Bay model. That model assumes that the area of development is pretty well defined. So it treats it just as impervious in the future. What we're starting to see across Virginia is areas that were never planned for development being opened up for data center opportunities. And so I think there's a big regional concern that we're underestimating the impervious surface from just the data center footprints on a multi-state basis. Next slide. Big problem is that in addition to the footprint is there's this huge energy consumption. A lot of it's natural gas combustion, but what you're starting to hear now is the unretirement of other fossil fuel facilities, then the future projections of different types of fuel mixes going forward, from all renewables to all nuclear, most likely a mix of everything. Next slide. The, the,
Sorry.
that's all right.
I touched it.
The image in the middle is the other thing, is thousands of miles of transmission that we're going to have to build out. One of the things that's interesting is that the projections keep going up, and they went up pretty dramatically. In 2019, there was a projection of almost zero growth for the Dominion retail territory. We're now up to a projection of an additional, 28 gigawatts. But actually, next slide. What Dominion claims that they have contracts for is 47 gigawatts. That's a lot. It's hard to wrap your head around how much that is. Manhattan is about 22 gigawatts at peak load. So 47 is a lot. It's for Virginia, it's basically a tripling of the size of the system. And so if you think about all the things that go into an electrical system, just a huge amount of infrastructure, thousands of miles of transmission, hundreds of substations, and then whatever the generation mix. The range is for millions of acres if it's solar without sufficient battery and complementary generation from other sources, to $500 billion worth of nuclear if you did it all nuclear. So, there's a lot of choices mixed in the mix there. This is a chart just to show you the changing projections, and the different colors were the year of the projection. So you see in 2021 it was pretty flat. By 2023 it's on this upward curve, and we're now at an even steeper growth. Next slide. The 47 gigawatts is some combination of contracts that Dominion has signed, and this is the contract process that they're going through. Similar with your utilities, but it will vary from state to state. So Pennsylvania have a different process, but there are varying degrees of reality in terms of the projections. At the outer edge, it's just pretty speculative and not that much required on the part of the folks seeking the access to power. By the time you get to electric service agreement, there are real penalties for not coming through with the actual demand. Next slide. We're operating under a sort of a slightly bizarre assumption that anybody asks for power has a right to it. That's not out of nowhere. We have a constitutional provision that says there's an obligation to serve. But what the debate in Virginia is now around how that's conditioned by the ability to meet those demands, the balance with other policies, the effect on reliability. So there's a healthy legal debate going on about the limitations on that sort of obligation to serve. What we're also trying to negotiate in the legislature is a requirement that the State Corporation Commission, our Public Utility Commission, approve the connection of demand as well as generation. So for large loads, that there's actually an oversight on whether or not that's working. Next slide. So what's that mean for you and me? Well, one is reliability is at risk. These red areas are the ones that the national report that came out yesterday has identified as being at high risk because of data center development. A whole of PJM is now a reliability area of concern, and that's going to trigger a whole lot of different policy implications. Way too complicated for today's discussion. Next slide. But more practically, what we're starting to see is PJM approving from a long list of proposals, some very specific transmission corridors, some of which are expansions of existing rights of way and others which are greenfield projects on new territory. Again, there's no really comprehensive map of proposals, and so this map, which is on our website, is an attempt to start putting that in an open source in an accessible format. So you can go to to our website, find this map, and sort of see how we put together the data layers. We haven't done it outside of Virginia for some of the conservation and planning data layers, but it's certainly a replicable model that you could do for Pennsylvania. Next slide. In addition to what PGM is approving is stuff that is in the Dominion program. This is just northern. This is like the northern part of the state. So this is just really literally Northern Virginia, and we can't really count the number of projects. Probably close to 100, because there's a combination of transmission and then specific substation development. Some of which are enormous and quite unprecedented in terms of the size that is going on. Next slide. Overall, we think it's this kind of numbers. This is from Dominion's submission last fall to the State Corporation Commission. About a third is solely for data centers. Another third, 40%, is mostly data center driven. And some of it is reliability based. You're going to see a lot of press that says the cost of electricity is not necessarily data center driven, that there were reliability issues that had to be fixed anyway. I think that's about 20% the truth. The reality is most places, the investment that's being discussed is data center driven. Next slide. And that number is big on a national basis. It's like $25 billion. So all of that gets factored into rate structure and rate and cost allocation. Next slide. And that's where folks are going to start facing the reality. When you combine it with the generation that's being required, 90% of which is driven by data centers, you're faced with how are we going to pay for, in Virginia, for about $270 to $300 billion worth of energy infrastructure. And what's a fair and equitable way to distribute those costs? Next slide. So that's the debate. We've done some work to make sure the public is aware of this through a combination of earned media and digital advertising. It's 90% of Virginians now believe the General Assembly should act dramatically to protect ratepayers from paying for power for big tech. It's a rather startling number. 90% of Virginians don't agree on anything. So it's a pretty significant polling finding. That poll was done about 2 weeks ago. Next slide. And the reason is when you do the math, the average ratepayer is starting to absorb the fact that they might be paying as much as $1,500, $2,000 more a year, and that would be mostly in the form of a subsidy to data centers, which are many cases are the richest corporations in the world. And so that's a concept that is getting broad penetration and is of deep concern. One of the things to hold in your head is that the cost of electricity if they don't fix the rate allocation could exceed any local benefits in terms of goods and services that come from increased tax revenue if you had a data center in your community. And that's how big the increase in electricity costs might be. Take next slide. So, be cautious when you think about saying yes to a data center. There are going to be proposals in the area that you guys work. You've got all the essentials, right? And they range in size to big ones like the one we're dealing with adjacent to the Manassas National Battlefield. The existence of parkland is no protection. This is directly adjacent to Manassas National Battlefield Park. And the proposal is 2,000 acres, about 27 million square feet of data center buildings, and we now estimate like 7 gigawatts of demand. So it'll probably be one of the biggest things ever built anywhere in terms of power demand. Next slide. And the transmission lines at one point were being proposed through the park itself. That's under litigation. It might still be overturned. We don't know. This is another example, which is sort of a co-location with an existing nuclear power plant down in Surrey, think 3 Mile Island. But you would be building the data center complex directly next door and taking advantage of the security zones and other things associated with existing nuclear power plants. So that's a real thing. Next slide. Even in very rural, remote places where none of this stuff exists, they're being considered. This is a proposal that would be tied to finding 1.5 gigawatts of energy it's on 800 acres near the Rappahannock River. Probably the motivation here is access to water. Next slide. So, mapping and knowing where these applications are coming from, starting to see the dynamics has been something that we've been doing. There's a cluster down in the lower left central part of this map. It says Culpeper. If you guys have been to Culpeper, it's a community about 25,000, small city surrounded by some really good farmland, very much like what you'd have around Chambersburg, Carlisle, Gettysburg on the other side of the mountain. Next slide. And the buildings are adding up. This is one example, 2 million square feet, and it's only on about 100 acres. Next slide. So I'm sure if you do land use mapping in your neighborhood, you'll find a lot of 100-acre parcels, and they can pack a lot onto those 2 million and 1.5 million square feet. And then you have to translate that into power demand. Now, sometimes there are little non-disclosure agreements and lack of transparency they'll sort of fudge what the power load. Right now, you can use 350 watts per square foot as a pretty safe, not conservative, but reasonable estimate for power density per square foot. So if you do the math, you're reaching a gigawatt or more, and a gigawatt is the size of a good sized natural gas power plant or basically a nuclear power reactor. Next slide. Even a pretty rural place like Fauquier, which is smaller than Culpeper in terms of its urban footprint. Next slide. The next wave is coming. This is a town of Remington that has a population of 600 people right now, and we're looking at two projects that total, 1.5, almost 1.5 gigawatts. So, it mushrooms pretty quickly, and that exceeds the capacity. Even though this is an area that already has power plants in place, it exceeds the capacity that they're able to generate. These were peaking plants built last century to supplement power grid for peak demand. Even running full bore, they wouldn't be enough to supply these land uses, which are really only on about 400 acres of land. Next slide. So that's the free, and you can keep doing this analysis ad nauseum. Keep going. Next slide. What was really surprising was when I took this out to a very rural county adjacent to Culpeper, Rappahannock County, which is right up against the Shenandoah National Park. And it's a county whose comprehensive plan says that our goal is to be a scenic county and do conservation. They're close to 40% protected between the park and privately conserved lands. The big green blob in the lower left corner is a 7,000 acre parcel that's going under conservation over the next 5-6 years. So, they're fully committed to a conservation future, and they didn't believe that there was any real prospect of data centers. And they're sort of, why should we care? And I pointed out to them the transmission lines are already running through the county, and that there are plenty of 100-acre parcels that are within a mile or two of existing transmission. So when they saw this map, they're like, oh, yikes, we have to take this seriously. So I think we're all at risk. It doesn't take a whole lot to change the picture, and the footprint of the buildings is nothing compared to the footprint of the energy infrastructure that comes with it. Next slide. So what do we have to watch out for? This is sort of the big picture energy. Right behind it, though, is consumptive water use. And while it is possible for these things to operate with closed cycle systems for cooling, you have to make sure you have got full disclosure, because there is evaporative loss even in the closed systems, and the amounts could add up. And there's no standard number. You have to get specific details. That's another area where transparency and a refusal to agree to non-disclosure agreements is really important in order to protect the public water supplies that they might connect to, but also stay on top of potential groundwater or surface water withdrawals. Next slide. There's going to be a lot of temptation. Please do not think that we're not aware of why these things are so attractive to local governments. A data center in Virginia, just on change in property value, will increase county fiscal benefits pretty significantly. We're seeing land go from $10,000 an acre to $1 million to $4 million an acre, depending on the access to power and water. The $4 million number is for a former tree nursery in Gainesville, Virginia. They sold 40 acres for $160 million. Pretty hard to turn that down. Many generations of wealth within that family. But even places that are more remote with less guarantees, the impact on property prices is pretty significant. In addition to that, depending on the state you're in and your ordinances, there's a business property tax on equipment, and that's actually even bigger. Just think about the cost of computers jammed into that square footage. And so there's for Loudoun County, they're now collecting over $1 billion a year in the combination of property and personal property, business property taxes. And that's about a third of their operating budget. And it's enabled them to sort of sustain a low tax rate, although the combined tax rate and assessments have basically meant that individuals are paying the same amount of tax that they have for the last 15, 20 years. What they avoided was a huge increase in taxes to cover their school construction debt. They built about 100 schools over a 20-year period, so they had a huge amount of construction costs they had to cover. Next slide. So here's a short graphic list of what to watch out for. The displacement of land uses, the conversion of areas that we say were light industrial or mixed use or commercial to data center use, then you're running out of land for some other uses. It can affect residential property prices, has an impact on that. Noise, water, air quality, habitat, and then just the general level of industrialization and the presence of the energy infrastructure. Next slide. Again, a long list. You can read that and we'll keep going. These are not rocket science kind of things, but the things that we focus in on are the impact that it has on existing neighborhoods and adjacent uses, the energy, the on-site power, and air quality, water usage. Locally, noise is actually a big issue. These air handlers operate all the time, and combined with on-site generation could be pretty noisy. During construction, traffic is a huge issue. Once they're finished, probably not, because they only have 5 to 10 employees per building. So that's not the big issue. And then lighting and building design can be a big neighborhood specific concern. Next slide. So these are things we've learned. These complexes get pretty big. So connectivity, where is the electric infrastructure going to go? What's the likelihood of the exercise eminent domain, speculation, those related land uses? Next slide.
Hey,
How are we doing?
Chris,
Yep.
Yeah, we're thinking the same thing. I think we'd like to wrap up in the next 5 minutes or so, but I'd also like to tell folks in the audience something really quick. If you have a question for Chris at the head of the table, you have your own paper, feel free to write down a question. We'll have time for a couple questions. So if you have something you'd like to ask, our program committee will be circulating to grab those when he's concluded. All right, thanks, Chris. Sorry, you can go back.
Okay. We're actually almost done. Next slide.
Okay, perfect.
So don't underestimate the size of substations. They're pretty big. They 5 to 10 acres now is the size because of the enormous amount of power moving through them. Next slide is one about the backup generators. This is a hot topic. And what we're worried about now is the use of backup generators for power while they wait for the grid to catch up. And that's a big potential air quality issue. Next slide. Keep going. They're big units. These are three, they're the size of a freight train, a rail car, like a freight car. They have to have between 100 and 200% of what their peak load is on site with fuel sufficient to fuel that for, I think, 48 hours. That was a big eye opener for us back in 2018. And then next slide, when you look at that on an aggregate basis, and we had to do this for the Department of Environmental Quality because they had no interest in knowing the answer themselves. We found that there are over 9,000 of these generators in Northern Virginia. And the total now is something close to 15 to 20 gigawatts. So it's a lot of power, and it's using a pretty dirty fuel source in sulfur and with unknown cumulative impacts. That's something we're studying right now, and something that you should be asking the Pennsylvania DEQ to start monitoring and modeling. Next slide. It's complicated. There are different standards for each of these different generator types. Next slide. But don't kid yourself. This is the PM 2.5 and NOx and VOC emissions that can really add up to public health threat. And so I think that it's worthy of the attention it's starting to get. Next slide. We're trying to push this modeling by having some PhD researchers do some work using models that are used by EPA, and they're starting to show an increase in impacts locally. Next slide. This could also affect regional haze, which is a concern for the Appalachian Trail and the park. Proximity to sensitive populations is something else to think about. Keep going. We can go quickly here. Go down about 3 slides. Right here. There you go. If you can click, I think that video will show, but if it doesn't, I'll figure out how to link that. But we finally, during the storm last week, were able to get video evidence of the use of these backup generators for baseload supply. And yeah, we'll fix that so everyone can look at it at their leisure. It's black smoke, so it's visible emissions. So the only other thing I would add is water supply. There's a lot more consumption than we're ready for. It varies very much from facility to facility, but it could be up into the millions of gallons a day of additional consumption from what we all know are constrained water supplies. And so keeping an eye on that, trying to get disclosure and trying to get regional and state authorities to do aggregate analysis, I think is absolutely critical. And I'll end there. There's a slide right at the end. Final thoughts. Don't sign NDAs. stay on top of your utilities and make sure that you recognize that this does have a direct threat to public health, safety, and welfare, in addition to the complicated economic and ratepayer impacts. So that's it.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Chris, I'm gonna ask you a couple questions. I'm taking my background audio off to see if you can see that there's just like
Yep.
many people behind us here, so you can at least get a
Good.
sense.
Hey, everybody. Good to see you.
So, Chris, we've got a couple great questions from the audience. And so the first one, or I'm combining two here. Yeah,
I can't hear you. Are you talking?
nope, I stopped talking. It's not
Okay.
you.
Okay.
All right, there we go. Okay, so our first questions are about using renewable energy to either mitigate or improve data centers. So are you aware of any benefits to either like cooling via geothermal or using solar panels in conjunction to try to mitigate the electric consumption?
So, I think down the road, extreme geothermal, which sort of goes down to the Earth's mantle, and takes advantage of very hot geological formations, and takes advantage of what we've learned from deep fracking technology. That has a lot of potential, enormous amount of energy, and there's no reason why that couldn't be turned into electricity. But it's still at the pilot level. It's not widely developed and not fully understood as to what the implications of that many deep wells would be. Renewable solar, you just have to do the math. Average is 10 acres per megawatt, and a gigawatt is 1,000 megawatts. So theoretically, on 10,000 acres, you could get a gigawatt, but you have to remember the capacity factor for solar is somewhere between 8% and 20% right now. And even with battery storage, you're only going to get up to about 50%. So you basically have to double that. So 20,000 acres per data center complex. Just a lot of land. It's great that they're thinking about putting renewable on site and that kind of thing, but they're don't be deceived by that statement until you get the full understanding of how much power it will generate and how much that will provide in terms of the load that's being generated. One of the most encouraging thing is the use of waste heat. A lot of the energy cost is cooling, and in colder climates, Nordic countries and other places, there's a huge efficiency gain from using that waste heat in community scale heating systems. So we're in places where steam heat is pretty common. That waste heat is very valuable. The Northern Virginia Regional Commission is looking into doing that with the waste heat from data centers in Loudoun County. But as you all know, our heating period is a couple months. Our cooling period is the real challenge, and waste heat is not a solution to that hot weather situation.
Thank you, Chris. All right, yep. Final question. Will proximity to a data center raise or lower homeowner property value in your experience?
Well, it'll raise its theoretical value if it could be rezoned to data center use. It will lower your residential value. And so what we're seeing is entire homeowners associations in Loudoun applying to the county for rezoning. And so they can, frankly, sell out and get out. The county allowed a couple of big data center complexes immediately adjacent to, 200 or 300 unit HOAs, and those people are suffering. They've lost residential value. They don't have quality of life, and pending a zoning decision, they're kind of stuck, and that's unfortunate.
All right. Well, Chris, I just want to, on behalf of the South Mountain Partnership and the more than 130 people that are behind me, it was such an honor to hear from you and to get to learn from your experience. We're in an area that, isn't yet in your shoes, but hearing about your experience, I think, can really help us learn to plan for the future.
Yeah. Well, good luck, and we're here to help. I think it's good citizenship has never been more important, and just I commend you and thank you for all the work you do. What I didn't get to show you is all the conservation work we're doing to enhance the Appalachian Trail and build out what we hope to be a 1,000,000-acre reserve in 9 counties. The reason we're in this is because it runs in direct conflict with what we think are very important conservation values. And I hope you understand this isn't because we're against progress or development. It's because we're dealing with the very real conflicts with what we think are equally important public benefits in terms of access to the outdoors, preservation of biodiversity, water supply, ag lands, and all based on state, federal, local policy. So thanks so much for what you do. Yep.
All right. Thank you, Chris.
See you later.